we're using one of the biggest leverages, which is OPM, other people's money, which you're obviously very well aware of it. This is literally magic for any single investor who understands the magic of resales. You should have a good understanding, a full understanding of what to look out for, what's a good payment plan, diversifying capital gradually instead of locking everything at once. We can purchase multiple properties. We can resell our off-plan assets, mostly anywhere in between 30 and 50% paid off the total installments. When it comes to the classic payment plan, obviously it is the one which is used most commonly with all the top tier developers. If you can get a 30-70 or a 40-60 payment plan, this is absolute music in our ears from construction start till the property is about to hand over, because here we have the highest leverage in terms of property appreciation and infrastructure appreciation. Your payments, your installment payments are due only once the developer reaches a certain completed construction milestone. This combination is extremely rare, and I haven't found anything similar on the market at the moment. It allows you to stretch your payments for the longest period of time possible. The return on equity on the invested capital is 50% because of the magical 50-50 payment plan. In Dubai's off-plan real estate market, the right payment plan is not just about convenience. It's all about controlling cash flow, maximizing flexibility, and multiplying return on equity. Bonjour! Hello, welcome back to Deals with Simon. In today's episode, we are going to discover the full topic of payment plans. It is very important to understand everything about the payment plan because specifically when it comes to investments, it can make or break your investment success. And there are different forms and types of payment plans, which I'm going to explain you later on. And there are obviously a couple of payment plans which I don't necessarily recommend and which I would even classify as red flags. And in order to orient yourself on the landscape of Dubai's off-plan real estate market, specifically when it comes to acquiring assets with a payment plan, you should have a good understanding, a full understanding of what to look out for, what's a good payment plan, and what's in a payment plan this is probably not in your favor. With that being said, let's get into the video. Before we directly get into the different types of payment plans and the practical examples to it, let me just share with you a better context, a quick overview of the main advantages of where the magic in a payment plan actually lies. So I put that into three different categories. Leverage 1, 2, and 3. Leverage 1 obviously is that we can deploy capital gradually instead of putting all the 100% of the property purchase value down to the table. That allows us financial flexibility, okay? And obviously you can keep liquidity free for other investments and for other opportunities, especially in the real estate segment that are coming up by time. So let's consider you approaching with 20 million dirhams and we want to purchase one particular property with the 20 million dirhams. We can do so, or we can split the 20 million dirhams into 10 and 10, purchase two properties with the valuation of each one 20 million dirhams, and we can then diversify across multiple properties, which is obviously very attractive instead of locking the full capital. So these are kind of advantages that we have when it comes to the first leverage, diversifying capital gradually instead of locking everything at once. We can purchase multiple properties and at the same time you have liquidity free to go into different asset classes as well. Continuing with leverage number 2, which is basically the option to refinance and to mortgage the final installment on handover, which is very attractive as well because here we're using one of the biggest leverages, which is OPM, other people's money, which you're obviously very well aware of it, and that means we can cover the balance through a mortgage, okay? And we still retain ownership of the actual property. And the anticipated mortgage rate, I'm speaking of anticipated, is anywhere between 5 and 6% for a non-resident. So someone who has no residency yet in Dubai and who wants to pay off the final installments of the actual payment plan, which we're going to look into in a second, of the property, would calculate anywhere between 5.5 and 5.9% of a mortgage rate right now. It's the second half of 2025. That can obviously be less or more in the near future. We don't know exactly, but this is basically something which you can calculate with. And last but not least, leverage number 3, the off-plan resale. This is basically the whole magic behind off-plan and payment plans, because here we have the chance to target the highest possible return on equity, as we have not put in 100% of the actual purchase value into the payment plan. So we can resell our off-plan assets mostly anywhere in between 30 and 50% paid off the total installments / the purchase value, okay? This is something you have to have on your mind. Completely depends on the developer in order to get our NOC, our non-objective certificate, which allows us to execute the resale process. We obviously need to pay with a private developer, for example, that depends on the SPA, the final contract, 30 or 40%, and EMAR, for example, as a semi-governmental developer, as the powerhouse and the #1 in Dubai when it comes to the overall market share, requires 50%, for example. So 50% should always be a benchmark to have on your mind to be able to pay or put liquidity into a payment plan before you can execute or anticipate the resale. Okay, so this is the whole magic behind an off-plan resale, and obviously we appear more to the new buyers, so to someone who is looking for a shorter completion timeline. Let's say a family from Europe is planning to move into a property here in Dubai in the next 3 to 6 months. Your off-plan asset, which you have acquired 4 years ago, is about to hand over in the next 6 months. This is now the perfect time to execute a resale, and the family is most probably willing to pay us 25, 30, 35% premium, even more depending on the property appreciation, depending on the infrastructure appreciation. But this is just an overall concept which you have on your mind. And this is basically the summary of the main advantages of why a payment plan is such a magical aspect when it comes to acquiring off-plan assets. Let's now continue with the different types of payment plans. And in order to have a better overview and to keep things very simple, I put them into 4 different brackets, 4 different categories. And we obviously start with the first one, which is the so-called classic payment plan. Now, when it comes to the classic payment plan, obviously it is the one which is used most commonly with all the top tier developers and with the established ones that I'm working with. And it is an ideal option for an investor as well as an end user, and is a very simple form. So what that means is the following, and I marked it in different colors now. 60%, when it's a 60-40%, is the amount which is paid under construction, and 40%, which you see here, which we make in green, is then paid on the completion. Okay, here for example we have a 70-30 payment plan next to it. 70% means basically paid under construction, okay, whilst the property is not completed yet, and then on handover, on completion, the remaining 30%. This is basically the overview of the so-called classic payment plan, and now I'd like to show you just an example to have that with clear numbers in a direct sales offer. A sales offer of a 5-bedroom villa in the Oasis by Emaar that comes on an 80-20 payment plan. That is basically a textbook example for the classic payment plan which I just explained. And here in the sales offer we find obviously on top of it the total purchase value, which is 20.6 million dirhams, and the completion date, which is very important, the estimated completion date, which is September 2029. And then if we scroll down, we can see the breakdown of the payments. On the left side we always find the percentages in a column, and on the right column we find the dirham amount. Okay, and you can see very clearly that the down payment here in this particular case only requires 10%. In most of the cases, in literally 90% of the cases, it is always 20% down payment and then continuing with the installments. Here it is 10%, which equals a little bit over 2 million dirhams here, okay? And then it continues all the way down until the final installment, which is here 20%, okay? So 80-20 means 80%, which are these payments here, obviously, okay? And then the final one, which is the 20% here. And you can see it here, it changes obviously with the amount, which is here 4.1 million dirhams as the final amount. This is the exact example of an 80-20 classic payment plan. Let's continue with this so-called low liquidity payment plan. This is literally magic for any single investor who understands the magic of resales. We deploy the least amount of capital and equity, and we can achieve the highest possible return on equity therefore, because we're using the time in between. So it's very attractive for an investor, because an investor who is coming to me says, Simon, I want to acquire an asset off plan, ideally in the pre-launch phase as soon as possible, and I want to like resell it as late as possible whilst it is under construction. Then this model is perfect to apply, because here we're using the 2, 3 or even 4 years in between from construction start till the property is about to hand over, because here we have the highest leverage in terms of property appreciation and infrastructure appreciation, and that leads to our high value, although we only deployed a certain extent of the capital. Okay, additionally to that, what we can do, it is the perfect baseline to mortgage and to finance basically the large amount on handover. Okay, so not only do you deploy a very small amount compared to the purchase value over the course of these 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, on handover you can mortgage and refinance the big chunk and therefore still deploy overall a very low amount of capital. Okay, and here I mark it again. That means, for example, if we can get a 30-70 or a 40-60 payment plan, this is absolute music in our ears, because that shows us the potential of actually investments, especially in a thriving city of Dubai, once we select the right units at a very reasonable price per square foot. Let me just show you a sales offer of a 4-bedroom unit in the 6 Senses private residences Dubai Marina by Select Group, which is overall a very attractive product. I mean, the 6 Senses as a brand, well established, Select Group as a developer, which is an absolute top tier 1 category. So this overall product is very attractive. And looking into the payment plan, this becomes an absolute no-brainer. Let's look at the actual facts. What we find here is a unit that I took out, which is priced at 18 million dirhams total purchase value, okay? And it comes with 5,200 square foot in size. So this is a massive property, and you can see we have the option of a 40-60 or 30-70 payment plan in this case. And we obviously do the math on the 30-70 example, okay? the 30% total paid till completion equals 5.4 million dirhams. That's approximately 1.5 million US dollars, and 70%, okay, equals the large chunk on handover, which is 12.6 million dirhams. So what that means is the following: with this particular payment plan, you are able to purchase yourself and acquire yourself a stunning half-floor penthouse residence, literally, okay, looking at the size and looking at the architecture, for as little as $1.5 million in the time horizon of approximately 3 years, because the payment, the final installment, okay, and obviously then the handover is in July 2028. So we're speaking about not even 3 years, and this is absolutely fantastic. So this is basically the magic of a so-called low equity payment plan, which we have exactly here. If you have the chance to get your hands on a product which is so attractive with such a payment plan, then this is definitely an invitation to take action. Coming on to payment plan type number 3, which is the so-called construction-linked payment plan. And here the name already tells what's behind it. So basically your payments, your installment payments are due only once the developer reaches a certain completed construction milestone. And that protects you obviously as the buyer, and that ensures accountability on both sides. And this is exactly what I have outlined here in the notes. So basically the construction-linked payment plan is given with top tier 1 developers, especially Ellington. Ellington always has a classical 70-30 payment plan with, in most of the cases, with a direct link to the construction progress. EMAR recently have included that as well in their overall payment plans, and that is quite interesting. Again, here project milestones need to be reached, and then only the developer is in a position to send you the invoice for the next installment payment. Okay, and again, this ensures accountability and is therefore quite important. And now let's have a quick look into an actual sales offer of a product from Ellington, where you see exactly how they are outlining this in the sales offer already, then in the booking form, and finally in the SPA. Here we have the sales offer of a beautiful residence in the Ocean House by Ellington on Palm Jumeirah. The property is priced at 22.5 million dirhams. You can see it exactly here. And next to it, we see the total size of 4,200 square foot. And most important here is the breakdown of the actual payment. So you can see here in the payment plan, the first 40%, 20% down payments and 10% and 10%, they are due directly in the beginning in the first 120 days, so the first 4 months, okay? And then the continuous payments, and I marked them here in red, you can see the 5% here, all right? They are directly linked to the construction progress. So basically 20%, 30%, 40% continues all the way down to basically 70%. And then on completion date, you have the final 30%. As explained, Ellington oftentimes, or most of the cases, rolls out a 70-30 construction-linked payment plan, and this is basically the whole magic behind this particular aspect. Last but not least, payment plan type number 4, which is the so-called post-handover payment plan. And I want to emphasize on the fact that this is by far the most attractive and at the same time the most rare payment plan which you can find out there nowadays. And there are a handful of developments, a handful of products which are currently on the market that have actually a post-handover payment plan. I'm going to show you one particular example of my absolute favorite of them. And basically, it allows you to stretch your payments for the longest period of time possible, because post-handover means the certain amount of the overall payments can be continued even 2 or 3 years after the actual completion and handover of the property. So you already moved in or you rented it out and you still can pay off the remaining balance, which is quite interesting. So let's look at the actual facts. Let's look at the notes. So you can see it very clearly here. We can either move in or we can rent out the property and then still pay off the remaining balance. A or B, it is obviously an excellent choice to gain the rental income and use an extraordinary amount of the rental income to pay off the installments. So this is very interesting, especially if you're building yourself an investment portfolio with several rental properties. If a significant amount of the rental income it can be used to pay off the property, then you can do the calculation. Then you have like multiple leverage factors, and this is what you can find here. Now I want to show you that basically with the numbers specifically. Again, in this case, we can find a 60-40 2 years post and over. That means 60% is what needs to be paid till the completion, and then the remaining 40%, which you see here, these 40% of the total purchase value are split into several payments, 2 years completion, 2 years after the completion, and that makes it an extremely relevant and an extremely attractive payment plan overall. Now I'd like to give you a very accurate example for one of these. This is a specific sales offer of a development that I have carefully selected, where I see a huge amount of value for money and actually potential capital appreciation long term because of the product quality, because of the brand prestige behind it, where we have a post-handover payment plan together. This combination is extremely rare, and I haven't found anything similar on the market at the moment. You have to understand that post-turnover payment plans oftentimes are used with so-called low-tier developer and entry-level developers overall, because they need to come up with something which makes their product seem extremely attractive in order to get the foot into the market. And I keep myself far away from these kind of developers, but in this particular case, we're speaking about the JD private residence. And I already made a complete YouTube video about this product because we see so much value here as Deals with Simon. And I'd like to dive into this specific offer of a 3-bedroom residence. You can see 3 bedrooms. It comes with 5,700 square foot. So this is a massive giant corner unit. And you can see that the selling price is only 12.8 million dirhams. So if you do the math on it, on the price per square foot, we're speaking about roughly 2,200 to 2,300 dirhams per square foot. This is a complete no-brainer considering the payment in addition to it, okay? Way more attractive even compared to the 6 census residents in the marina where we had the 30/70 payment plan, okay? Because here what we find is an extremely low price per square foot, but with the JD as a brand and with the position of the building and looking into the secondary market where we find similar products like these trading in between 3.5 and 5 or even 6,000 per square foot, this is exactly where I see the potential, okay? So let's look at the schedule of the payments and at the breakdown. So you can see very clearly that in the first place we have a 20% down payment, okay? So these are 2 times 1.2 million dirhams. And then it continues obviously until the completion, which we have here, with several more payments of 5%, 10%, 5, 10, 5, 10. And then the magic begins. 4 months post handover, I make this in red in order to demonstrate it better. 4 months post handover, 8 months post handover. So all 4 months we have 5% payments. Okay, and that equals then basically a total of 35, because it's 5 times 7 payments, 35% is post handover over the course of 30 months, which is exactly 2.5 years. So this is the whole concept of a post handover payment plan applied onto a product with enormous value for money and overall potential. And this is exactly something that I would definitely go for. Before we wrap it up, I'd like to show you one more practical example that is the perfect proof, black on white, that the potential by using a payment plan and deploying capital gradually and selecting the right property with a huge resale value, considering the right location, developer and product type, is absolutely endless. Let's get into it. So we find an ultra luxury residence here, a 4-bedroom residence, not specifically referring to any developer or product, just like giving it a raw example here. And we're having a 50-50 payment plan, okay? So this is subject to negotiation. In this space, absolutely possible to get a payment plan where we pay 50% till the property is completed, and on handover, on completion, the remaining 50%. Now, we just anticipate a valuation of the property in the beginning. This is realistic of 40 million dirhams on paper, okay? And we just expect a capital growth of 8% per year, okay, which is absolutely reasonable. It's below the average looking at the last 3 to 5 years. Speaking of the massive undersupply in the ultra luxury space, we can anticipate even like 2 digits, but let's keep it very reasonable with the 8%. And we consider that the handover is in 3 years, so 3 years times 8%, that's roughly 25% increase in the value. So from 40 million, that would result in 50 million dirhams is the property worth close before the completion, okay? And now the magic begins, because we only paid 50% equity, that results in 20 million dirhams. That means on paper our profit is 10 million dirhams, which is quite reasonable and quite good for this kind of time horizon, right? Because that's 2.5 million US dollars. Now the actual return on investment on the purchase price is 25%, as we know, but the return on equity on the invested capital is 50% because of the magical 50-50 payment plan. And this is exactly what I want to refer here, because this is the whole magic and the whole genius behind investing in off-plan properties, using the right payment plan, using the right strategy, and profiting from the actual time horizon from construction start all the way down to the property is completed. And by now, you should have full clarity about the main advantages, the leverages when it comes to using a payment plan correctly. And on the other side, you should have a full, clear, big picture now of the different types of payment plans, and even with the practical examples, which developers are using what kind of payment plans and how does it look like in practice. And now it's time to take action, because I want you to have full clarity what kind of product, what kind of development with which kind of payment plan makes sense in your specific situation, depending on what's your investment goal or what's your goal overall with the property purchase. And that can only be discussed in a private one-on-one consultation. I'd like you to click the link below this particular video, fill out the form, give me upfront information as much as you can. The more accurate, the better, because this is the best possible way how I can prepare myself for the meeting. And I will take 45 minutes of my time, can be shorter, can be longer, to consult you in the best possible way and figure out exactly which product matches your specific investment goals and can lead to those kind of results, which you can see right now in this particular example, which I'm showing you, or overall what we see in the whole trajectory of the buyer's real estate market. With that being said, click the link below, fill out the form, take action, see you on the other side, and I'll see you in Dubai.